welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, clashes between the armed ethnic groups and government forces intensify in northern Myanmar, and the fight threatens to spill over border to China. What will Aung San Suu Kyi do? And talks of free trade is still on the mouths of many. China's vice premier arrives in Germany to convince officials to be against trade protectionism. We begin today's show with the ethnic conflict in northern Myanmar's Shan state. Gunfire broke out early Sunday morning when an alliance of 3 ethnic armed groups launched surprise attacks on government military outposts and police stations. 10 people were killed and 33 left injured. The clashes occurred along an area bordering China, and one Chinese civilian was wounded by a stray bullet. Myanmar's government is trying to push forward a national peace agreement in a bid to bring together ethnic militias who have not inked the nationwide ceasefire accord. China has been alarmed by previous fighting along the shared border, and the foreign ministry instantly called for calm in the region.
China urges all parties in the conflict to exercise restraint and conduct an immediate ceasefire so as to avoid escalation in tension, and to take concrete and effective measures to resume peace in the China-Myanmar border area.
And earlier we spoke to our correspondent David Grunbaum in Yangon about the current humanitarian and political situation over there.
8 months after becoming Myanmar's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi faces domestic crises on 2 fronts, plus growing pressure from the international community that is concerned that Myanmar cannot handle this on its own. In the country's west, hundreds of Rohingya Muslims have fled to neighboring Bangladesh. This comes after security crackdown after 9 border guards were killed last month. Now, 150,000 people in this region depend on humanitarian aid, but those deliveries have been suspended for almost a month and a half. Now, security forces have been accused of extrajudicial killings, rape, and burning down homes. Myanmar's government denies these accusations, and Suu Kyi has told foreign diplomats that she believes her country has been targeted unfairly. But foreign diplomats have called for a credible and independent investigation. Now, over in the country's northeast, on Sunday, 4 armed ethnic groups teamed up and attacked the military. They say this assault is in response to recent offenses by Myanmar's army. Now, thousands of people have fled this fighting into neighboring China. Now, Myanmar's army has been fighting armed ethnic insurgencies for more than 60 years, and several analysts tell me that in order to have political stability and significant economic growth over the long term, the government has to reach a peace deal with all the armed ethnic groups. But in recent days, that looks very complicated.
As being mentioned earlier, more than 3,000 Myanmar nationals have entered China to escape the fighting. Currently, the Chinese town of Wanding in Yunnan province have borders. Myanmar has set up emergency camps over there.
The town of Manghai in southwest China's Yunnan province has taken in more than 2,000 Myanmese.
When the planes came, everything was so chaotic. When the bombs were thrown, we ran away. Every family fled.
Several hundred in this temporary shelter alone, and each is given the daily necessities. But despite this care, they still worry about home and how to carry on with their lives once they return to Myanmar. As clashes die down, this boy's parents return home to tend to their cattle, leaving him, his siblings and cousins in China. They might be safe, but this isn't their home.
I'm busy with this and that. I have to cook and keep our tent clean.
On Tuesday morning, Chinese police and aid groups called for solidarity among the Myanmese to help each other through a difficult time. Meanwhile, across the border, smoke and gunfire, sporadic, but showing no sign of stopping. Fled with his entire village. They're planning to stay in China for less than a week, but he brought his herd of cattle with him just in case.
Who knows? We might have to stay here for as long as 15 days or more.
Home is within sight, but so too is the ongoing fight. It's a home none of these people can return to, at least for now.
To discuss further about the conflicts going on in Myanmar, we have in our Beijing studio Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Research Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, to our program. Meanwhile, joining us from Singapore, we're having Mr. Lin Tan-Wai, research fellow at the National University of Singapore. Welcome as well. Mr. Lim, let me begin with you about understanding two conflicts going over there. One is the Muslim minority who have never been regarded as Myanmar. In other words, not citizens of Myanmar, seeking shelters only in Myanmar. Their conflicts with the forces, the government forces. And secondly, of course, is the minorities, 4 of them over there fighting against the government forces. Tell us about your assessment of the real situation there.
Okay, these are very long-standing problems. They're not new. So, in effect, the current government has inherited them. And it's very complicated because it involves several states. So we're talking about Shan State, we're talking about Wa State, we're talking about Rakhine. And within each of these conflicts, there are several groups. For example, the group that we are focusing right now in this show, it actually consists of the Ta'ans, the Kachins, the MNDAA, and other splinter groups. So you can see that it's a kind of a multi, layered, complex problem. And it also involves religion, as you have mentioned, amongst the Rohingyas that are fleeing towards Bangladesh. One of the reasons why they are fleeing is because some of the government forces suspect that there are operatives within the community that they want to seek out. So this very complicated, very complex issue, and I think it will probably take a long time to resolve. And time is probably needed even for de-escalation.
Right. It might be a long time because these are questions being formed over a long period of time. But Mr. Yang in Beijing, that is happening on China's border.
Yep.
Between China and Myanmar, 3,000 people already come into China.
Yeah.
In the Wanding specific county in China's Yunnan province, that's going to be a big problem for China. It's also going to be a big problem for Bangladesh. Bangladesh already summoned in some of the diplomats from Myanmar to talk about that issue. They don't want these people to be in their country either. They want to repatriate these people. Yeah. So what does it mean for China's, for Myanmar's neighbors, such as China?
Well, for China, not only for the issue of the refugee, 3,000 maybe more sometime later, and also a problem of the dangers, risks for Chinese nationals in the neighboring area. There have been some Chinese nationals with harm. So loss of lives and loss of assets. So it's a really serious problem, challenge to China. So first of all, China has to insist on the principle of non-intervention about Myanmar's internal affairs. But on the other hand, China will be very, very firm and take a very tough action to guarantee our own national security and our national interests.
Okay, let me go to you once again, Mr. Lim. What to do, first of all, about the security of the border? It has so much to do with these people who are 1 million big, which is a very small minority inside Myanmar. They're called the Rohingya. They are never being regarded as Myanmar. They are not citizens, even though they settle in that country for generations. Their homes and schools are being regarded as illegal structures, so might be torn down. These people organize themselves and fight against the government forces. The 9 police officers were killed by some of those from this group, and therefore the government forces pushed back. That's what we are seeing right now. The question is, what is the way to solve this? Mr. Lim.
Well, one of the proposal that has been put forward is, and that is a proposal that's favored by the NLD party that is in power right now, is for federal state. But this is further complicated by the fact that there are so many stakeholders involved. The military is involved. And also, as I mentioned, there are so many ethnic and religious groups that are involved. So in order to form a rainbow coalition or consensus across, a broad consensus across all these groups will take a lot of political will and also compromise. And therefore, time again is very much needed. Plus, the Myanmarese political system. You have about 25% of the parliament that is within the military's control. And so there's also a very acute need for political consensus even within the government and the political process. And here's where China has publicly mentioned that it's willing to help out with the reconciliation process. But as the other guest, Mr. Yang, has mentioned, it cannot be seen as an interference in the internal affairs of Myanmar.
Right.
So it also has to have some kind of indication from the Myanmarese government, or at least some form of invitation to help out with this issue, and probably other international stakeholders as well.
There are other international stakeholders who have been vowing to help also with the national reconciliation process in Myanmar, particularly when Ms. Suu Kyi came into office earlier. And yet we see the rhetorics have been changing, particularly from the Western countries and even from some of the international media outlets. More accusations rather than now more talk about solutions. Mr. Yang, what do you make of this change of attitudes coming from some of the important stakeholders, particularly, I just say, if I could use the word, the West? Yeah. And what does it mean for Ms. Suu Kyi and her government, which needs consensus, as Mr. Lim mentioned, to go ahead to approach a new solution?
Well, first of all, the change of the attitude from the West is based on the change of value of the politics in Myanmar. Say they highly appreciate Suu Kyi's value and political institutions, so they change their attitudes. But the problem is the reality remain unchanged. The conflicts, the contradictions, the inequalities among the ethnic groups, everything remain unchanged. So I'm afraid at this moment, the West appreciate Suu Kyi's regime and appreciate Suu Kyi's efforts. But if take actions to address the real problems beyond the value framework, I'm afraid that the honeymoon between Suu Kyi's government and the West will be terminated.
Well, we all understand very well that State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi from Myanmar has been making the simmering unrest in Myanmar's border region as a governmental priority since she took office, and yet there are a lot of realities. Clashes of this sort continue. As we mentioned, in September, fights broke out between the military and rebels in the southern Kayin state and the northern half of Rakhine state, and it's currently under a military lockdown after a string of deadly attacks on border posts last month. So to the police officers over there, the latest clashes in Shan state are yet another blow to Suu Kyi's hopes of forging a nationwide peace agreement. Mr. Lim, that question is ever approaching to Ms. Suu Kyi. That is, how will she face the realities? Will she also incorporate some of the measures that she accused the earlier administration of doing in terms of handling the current crisis? That would, of course, be a question mark. And secondly, how would she answer the so-called accusations or questions coming from some members of the international community? Mr. Lim.
She has a very difficult job, and she's trying to manage the job. It's a very complex problem because these problems have been around even before she took power. So it is not realistic for us or for anyone to expect Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi to completely resolve them within a very short time. Having said that, her government was making some headways in the peace process in the Wa state before the current round of conflict. So if she's able to persist with some of these peacemaking gestures, and more importantly, if she's able to strike a consensus with the other political factions within her, and also within the political environment of Myanmar's political scene, then there might be a possibility for the peace process to go forward.
Right.
And it has to occur in stages. There has to be first de-escalation, and after de-escalation, a ice-breaking session before they can actually talk about the main terms of a peace process.
Right.
And these require a lot of time, a lot of political will, and a lot of political consensus. And the international community, including China, can come in and help out with the process, as well as Myanmar's ASEAN counterparts.
Right. At this moment, Mr. Yang, we understand there were earlier a peace talk, if we could use that phrase, between the government and also some of the minorities of the country. 17 out of the 20 already participated in the meeting, and yet some have not. And those some have recently been heating up their campaigns against the government forces. But even about that peace talk, it is in the nature of these minority groups trying to seek more autonomy with political consent from the government. And yet, as you may know, a country could only give certain degrees of autonomy to the minority groups of a country. So this is a very interesting tug of war, if we could use that phrase once again, between the government and these minority groups. Mr. Yang.
Well, I think the situation and the issue of Myanmar that you mentioned that we're discussing are very unique. In total, there are 135 ethnic groups, and only one of the 100 plus occupy over 60% of the population. So in fact, the equality issue has been a decades-long problem for this country. So basically, I think the failure of the previous peace talks lies in the lack of the full equalities among all the groups. So for solving this problem or contradiction or dilemma, I think the authority who commands the advantages over all the parties, groups, should lower further the threshold, should give a greater common grounds, should make a greater compromise, so that the process can be more inclusive, including all the groups.
Mr. Lim, is that possible? I mean, you can see, while Mr. Yang explained the realities on the ground in Myanmar, that is the differences of the level of expectations among different groups and between these groups and also the government. That is very hard to readjust the expectations, as you may know. Mr. Lim.
There are long-standing political problems, but at the core of the political problems, there are also economic ones. And what are the economic issues that involve? The economic issues that involve include apportionment of resources, who owns which part of the forest, who owns which part of the gemstone mines, how do they equitably distribute the wealth from the natural resources, and also apportionment of territorial boundaries, all the economic problems. And it may be possible to focus on economic problems first, resolve some of the bread and butter issues on resource allocation, and also economic development. Again, that's where the international community can come in, or the One Belt One Road from China, or the AIIB from China, or the ASEAN cooperative partners. They can come in to help with economic development parts of the issue. So if they can start off with the resource issue, the apportionment of natural resources, and also economic development, perhaps there can be a functional solution that can be sort of the early stages in an early solution to the more complex political issues.
And Mr. Lim, suggestion AIIB is not China's, but rather an organization that incorporates many founding members, their consensus. But by the way, let me come back to you, Mr. Yang. Will Mr. Lim's suggestion about these different kinds of organization mechanism coming together, how much will that really address the root problems? After all, it is still Myanmar's own issue. They have to come up with their own consensus. Is political, economic issues chicken and egg thing? Are we seeing a ever worse?
Yeah, I really agree with Mr. Lin's idea. Actually, you are right. Say all the mixed groups sitting the table plus some outsiders have a question of chicken and eggs. Who should go first? But the difficult answer lies in the economic cooperation, economic development. Now, by facing so many dilemmas, the common exit lies in the economical one. So we should focus on the economic cooperation, meanwhile continue to address the political differences, so that we can have a solution.
Before we go, final words from both of you, very briefly if you can. We see the root cause, we see the political crisis, and we also see an immediate border crisis going on right now. What to do? Very briefly sum up, Mr. Lim, one sentence.
Okay, three things very important. Number one, pragmatism. Go for economic development and cooperation. Number two, have a very broad consensus amongst the political faction. And number three, compromises.
I see. Mr. Yang.
For China, first of all, ceasefire unconditionally right now. Secondly, quick arrangement for the refugees and measures preventing more refugees flooding in both Bangladesh and China.
All right. A lot to be done, but thank you so much for both of you for putting forward your suggestions and your insights. Yang Xiyu, Lin Tanwai, really appreciate gentlemen for being with us. A crisis going on at the border. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Europe's far right is boosted by Trump's win. So what does this mean for the continent's trade situation with China? A high-level Sino-European meeting in Hamburg is going on, tries to untangle the complexities. But will the China-German example be a good one? You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing every Monday to Friday. I'm Tian Wei. During the 7th Hamburg Summit, senior officials and entrepreneurs from China and the EU countries gathered to discuss future economic relations. Free trade and cooperation top the agenda as both sides show a sincerity in tackling pertinent issues. But as Europe's far right gains popularity, can a free market still exist? What about the examples between China and Germany? Before our discussion, let's take a look at this.
You might expect the Bootman family business to be in favour of lower steel prices. They do, after all, make steel parts for the construction industry. But right now they won't buy the cheapest product on the market, which is imported from China.
Grundsätzlich ist ein freier Handel immer das Bessere.
In principle, free trade is always the better choice. But in this case, it makes sense to protect the domestic industry against lower quality products at an output level which is unreasonable. I'm not afraid that German or European steel might be a bit more expensive. The price of our products will be a bit higher. There will be no other effects.
But many European buyers aren't prepared to pay more to support local suppliers.
The European Union may be the world's second largest producer of steel, but the industry here is in trouble. Bosses say that imports coming from China are unfairly priced, and they want protection in the form of tariffs to try and put a stop to them.
It's a sticking point that comes at an awkward time. Officials from both countries at the annual China Meets Europe Economic Summit talk of keeping free trade alive at a time when the very foundations of globalisation are being shaken. Indeed, that's one of the arguments used by those European Union officials who back formally recognising China as a market economy early next month. In other words, a free and fair trader. Chinese executives here believe a few outstanding issues shouldn't stand in the way.
Economic growth, economic reform is the hallmark of China's strategy under Xi Jinping and presidents before him. So I hope China will continue in that role, but also with these new developments, I think China should speed up economic structural reform and liberalization, because that will provide stability for the world.
Such a move could make imposing import tariffs more difficult. The Bootmans and their suppliers even more hope the EU may still find a way. Guy Henderson, CCTV, Hamburg.
To discuss more about this, join me in the Beijing studio. We have two panelists, Mr. Zhang Jianping, Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. And meanwhile, joining us, Mr. Jörg Wittke, who is the President of the European Chamber of Commerce here in China. Welcome to our program. Of course, we want to talk about China-European business and economic ties, but sometimes it's too big an issue to be handled within a 20-minute discussion. So let me narrow down with some of the deals going on between China and Germany, since you, sir, Mr. Wittke, is originally from Germany. Some of the deals that China is trying to pursue in merger and acquisition of German companies have not been doing very well. You are aware of some of the cases. What exactly is going on here?
Well, looking back, I mean, China has been extremely successful in buying into German industries. The recent case of KUKA, which is robotics, is one of those. It bought into an airport, it bought into many others. Now there has been two cases, one is Alstron and Osram, which are under investigation by the German government, and if there are some implications of security, they have to then find out if that has to be rejected, but both deals are under investigation, they're not rejected. So Germany has so far not rejected any deal as we speak.
I understand you want to emphasize the fact that it has not been rejected, and yet long investigation to business people, that means almost like a rejection, isn't it? That means your deal cannot be proceeded.
Yeah, actually, you know that today China's investment both in EU and in the US, booming, because right now the assets, price is quite rational. Also, today, so a lot of Chinese corporations want to have their, new technology platform, or their new sales networks or R&D centers, something like that. They hope to upgrade their business. So in Germany, I think that generally speaking, because of those German corporations, actually they have their concerns. For example, in case China's investor come here, and if they can provide, job opportunities, or if they will change their business model, or if they will have the right way, just like they concerned. So many issues will be considered. So that means the owner will consider if China's investors will be welcomed. That will take time. So, but if you look back, those cases happened in Germany, just like he said that. There is no, rejected, project.
But my question is, if you further doing investigation for a long time, for business community, that's almost like a no, which is a way of delaying the deal. We see two things. One is going on with a German company that is inside Germany. Another thing is going on outside Germany in the U.S. branch of the German company. The U.S. branch, according to the U.S. side, they want to say no to the deal. Well, inside Germany, the so-called investigation is going on. So the question is, Mr. Zhang, is Chinese community, business community, happy with this? Are they okay with this? As long as the investigation going on, they will wait. Or actually their interest will move somewhere else?
Of course not. I think that, actually now from Chinese side, we hope we can accelerate our, going abroad, progress. Meanwhile, we hope we can do, our business. Now, but I think that from, not only Germany, but also other European countries as well as the US, actually, they think China's investors may be quite different from those Western countries' investors. And they have...
And are they?
Yeah.
Are they creating jobs? Are they bringing problems rather than bringing solutions to the local community? What do you think from the Chinese perspective, Mr. Zhang?
I think most of China's investors provided, job opportunities for local residents. But a few cases also criticized, by those host countries. So I think that now actually Westerners maybe they have another, perspective, another angle to look at China's investors. So that means they just want to keep worrying on China's investors and hope have a long, time to make investigations or maybe have their long procedures.
I understand your sympathy rather to the investigators, but what I want to ask is more between the business communities, because this is really the solution, isn't it? Government sometimes could be one step or two steps, even 5 steps late than what the business communities really want to do with one another. Mr. Woodke, what about your comment here?
I think that China has been extremely successful in Germany. I'll put it in perspective. I mean, they even bought a bank, they bought a couple of companies, and that has been done in record time. KUKA was bought within 2 months. And of course, that flies in the face of the fact that many of these takeovers could never have been perceived by Germans here, for example, in China. So the delay and this kind of anxiety that you would say causes jitters among the business community, of course it does. And I'm sure the Chinese colleagues of ours are not happy if a deal like Extra is being extended. But this is the rule of the game. It's transparent. It might be rejected, might be approved. But at the same time, it raises, of course, the temperature in Germany. We say, we have been extremely open, and China has been very positive in investing here into existing assets, whereas Germans actually find it very difficult in order to do the same in China.
How would you comment about the China-German example in terms of the overall China-EU picture, economic and trade deals?
I mean, Germany and China have been doing extremely well. Germany has been 50% of all the exports from Europe into China, and Europe and China have been a love story when it comes to trade. 1 billion a day of euros going from China to Europe and 500 million going backward. And of course, these issues come up of market access. And again, you might question why this is such a big deal already in Europe all of a sudden when 1 or 2 deals are in investigation, when we can't even do anything close over here.
But on the other hand, you see phenomenon like this. Many would ask, what is the reasons behind this? Is this a reason mainly because further business investigations have to be done? Or it is an issue of perception? The former one, of course, will be easier accepted because that's according to the rule of law that has been done. But if it is the second, the latter, that would mean a bigger issue. Mr. Woodke, comment from you if you can. We understand Mercedes-Benz, a China manager, were dismissed by its parent company back in Germany because he made some harassing remarks against some of the Chinese people he's dealing with. It was a small issue. He was just parking the car and began cursing, and there were some kinds of quarrel between him and the Chinese people that he's talking to. And then he began to come up with a lot of insulting words against his Chinese neighbors and those who are trying to solve the problem there. And that's when it became a problem. This is only a small incident, and yet the issue is whether there are real perception issues behind this. And whether this one should be examined even closer if we want to understand what is really going on in our minds about businesses between China and Germany.
No, I think you have to put this in perspective. This was one man freaking out, having a bad day. The question
we don't know what kind of day he had, but not everyone who had a bad day have to curse against the Chinese neighbor or the German neighbor.
No, I mean, racism is bad in any case. I mean, we see racism across the world, and this is not excusable. The man has been dealing badly. Using pepper spray on top of it made it certainly not better. But I mean, the company Daimler reacted with textbook. They investigated it, they sent the man back, they apologized as it is. So I mean, we also have to see the other side, that the company has done basically the right reactions. And again, one case which it puts in perspective, because we never had a case like this. And again, in the 90s, a family of 6 Germans were killed in Nanjing, and no, the whole Germany was not thinking that China is all of a sudden a security threat. And now we have a very thriving European chamber in Nanjing. People are very happy. So sometimes incidents like this happen, and we have to be cautious not to politicize and over dramatize it. Germany, China has a great relationship. That was an insulated case, and Daimler reacted extremely well.
Is it a perception issue, or is it a procedure issue?
I'm afraid that we should make our judgment case by case. And you know that actually now between China and Germany, between China and other economies, investment cases becomes more and more. So in different circumstances and different saying, different expression maybe cause different sense, different feelings. So I think that from Chinese side, we hope we can have our mutual respect to foreign investors. Also, when we go to other economies, also we should respect each other. Yeah.
China, of course, its interest of investment overseas and also trade and economic ties has been evolving when it comes to specific sectors. China's target sector of merger and acquisition investment been changing from the year 2005 to 2010. Energy was a main target, taking up more than half all mergers and acquisitions. Technology, media, and telecommunications, also known as TMT, accounted for the smallest slice of the pie, just 1%. But in the last year alone, for example, the industrial sector held the top spot in all M&A investment, and TMT was promoted to the second place, accounting for an impressive 18%. So you see, interests have changed from the Chinese side. Interests have also been changing and evolving from the German side, if we can use an example. So how can we make sure the procedures, the policies, and also the consumers would go together with this trend of the business from both sides? Mr. Wuttke, how can we prepare them, and how should they adjust it themselves?
Well, I think that both regions or nations can work with transparency to inform each other about standards, that they use same standards or similar standards that actually protect consumer interests, for example, at the same time that they cooperate, open up the marketplace, remain open in Europe or open up more in China in order to give the consumer more choices. And there's still a long way to go. I'm just afraid that we are now in the phase of populism and nationalism that actually provides a bit of a slippery slope, that actually the consumer might have less choice than in the past.
We understand that Mrs. Merkel wanted to rerun for her office, and of course she has been a guardian of free trade, and yet we all understand the immigration issue has been doing her some blow politically in your own country, Germany. So the question is, what about the tug of war between these two factors? Mr. Wuttke, what do you make of it with the rise of populism you see in your own continent concerning immigration issues? You also see in the United States with the election rhetorics. Do you think politicians, even like Mrs. Merkel, will be able to still continue the pursuit of trade, international trade, and free trade?
Well, she has been a cool-headed chancellor for the last 11 years or so. And she's now again, as you said, running again. She certainly has to make amendments on the immigration policy, but she definitely knows what supply chains are all about, what openness is all about. She's chairing G20. She just takes it over from China. We have a summit in July in Hamburg, and I'm sure that free trade is going to be on the agenda. She sees that G20 countries become more and more protectionist. She's certainly worried about it. And China has the same interest like Germany. We are heavily dependent on exports. The last thing we want is to close ourselves in order to entice everybody else to close as well. It has happened before. 100 years ago, big globalization was shrinking in no time. We can't allow this to happen again.
Mr. Zhang, at this critical juncture, United States is, if we could use the word as some analysts describe in chaos because the new administration struggles to come into power, which is having very different set of policies, supposedly, with the previous administration. And now China and European countries are getting ever closer, at least according to the frequencies of conferences as we covered. So do you think these two important, one is China, the other is the European continent, be able to seek a new path or be able to become the pioneers in terms of furthering the path of globalization and also trade?
Of course, I do believe, because right at this stage, you can find that both China and the EU, we are belonging to, one of the biggest trade partners for each other. Meanwhile, now we are promoting our, bilateral trade investment. Especially, that in recent years between China and EU countries, we have a new bridge, that is the Belt and Road Initiative. On this new platform,
but still needs to be implemented.
Yeah, that on this platform, those European countries already, regarded our, cooperation partners on this new platform. For example, UK or France, Germany, all of them show they are very interested to join this cooperation. They are welcomed. So in this regard, I think that between China and Germany, actually, we could be the bilateral partners on platform. That means we can promote infrastructure connectivity. Meanwhile, we can have our policy dialogue and people-to-people connectivity, promote travel, education, tourism sectors.
Oh, sounds like beautiful pictures.
Many
before we go, very briefly from you, Mr. Woodka, what about implementation? We are talking about framework, we're talking about policies, we're talking about aspirations, but will it really, Germany, China, European countries strike a new road ahead?
Well, frankly, I mean, the good news about Donald Trump's election is that possibly China and Germany have to step up to the plate in order to fill this gap that the US, that has been the pillar of free trade, is all of a sudden opening up. I think China and Germany in particular, these two world champions of trade, are called upon now in order in particular to raise this at G20. They both have to step up.
All right, thank you so much. Jörg Woedeke, coming from the EU Chamber of Commerce here in China, and also Mr. Zhang Jianping from the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for both of you. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.